Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 957th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the keeper came to Ibrahim, Kahib's son, in the garden, he said to him, Rise, O my son, and go up into the arbor, for the slave girls are come to order the place, and she cometh after them. So beware lest thou spit or sneeze or blow thy nose, else we are dead men, I and thou. Hereupon Ibrahim rose and went up into his nest, whilst the keeper fared forth, saying, Allah grant thee safety, O my son. Presently, behold, up came 4 slave girls, whose like none ever saw, and entering the pavilion, doffed their outer dresses and washed it. Then they sprinkled it with rose water, and incensed it with ambergris and aloes wood, and spread it with brocade. After these came 50 other damsels with instruments of music, and amongst them Jamilah, within a canopy of red brocade, whose skirts the handmaidens bore up with hooks of gold, till she had entered the pavilion, so that Ibrahim saw naught of her nor of her raiment. So he said to himself, By Allah, all my travail is lost, but needs must I wait to see how the case will be. Then the damsels brought meat and drink, and they ate and drank and washed their hands. After which they set her a royal chair, and she sat down, and all played on instruments of music, and with ravishing voices, incomparable singing. Presently out ran an old woman, a duenna, and clapped hands and danced, whilst the girls pulled her about till the curtain was lifted, and forth came Jamilah, laughing. Ibrahim gazed at her, and saw that she was clad in costly robes and ornaments, and on her head was a crown, set with pearls and gems. About her long, fair neck she wore a necklace of unions, and her waist was clasped with a girdle of chrysolite bugles, with tassels of rubies and pearls. The damsels kissed ground before her. When I considered her, quoth Ibrahim, I took leave of my senses and wit, and I was dazed, and my thought was confounded by amazement at the sight of loveliness, whose like is not on the face of the earth. So I fell into a swoon, and coming to myself, weeping-eyed, recited these 2 couplets. I see thee, and close not mine eyes for fear, lest their lids prevent me beholding thee. And I gazed with mine every glance these eyne, ne'er could sight all the loveliness moulding thee. Then said the old Kahramana to the girls, Let 10 of you rise and dance and sing. And Ibrahim, when looking at them, said in himself, I wish the lady Jamilah would dance. When the handmaidens had made an end of their pavan, they gathered round the princess and said to her, O my lady, we long for thee to dance amongst us, so the pleasure of our joy may be fulfilled. For never saw we a more delicious day than this. Quoth Ibrahim to himself, Doubtless the gates of heaven are open, and Allah hath granted my prayers. Then the damsel bussed her feet and said to them, By Allah, we never saw thee broadened of breast as today. Nor did they cease exciting her till she doffed her outer dress, and stood in a shift of cloth of gold, broidered with various jewels, showing breasts which stood out like pomegranates, and unveiling a face as it were the moon on the night of fullness. Then she began to dance, and Ibrahim beheld motions he had never in his life seen their like, for she showed such wondrous skill and marvelous invention that she made men forget the dancing of bubbles in wine cups, and called to mind the inclining of the turbans from head tops, even as saith of her the poet, A dancer, whose form is like branch of bond, flies my soul well nigh in his steps I greet. While he dances no foot stands still, and meseems that the fire of my heart is beneath his feet. And as quoth another, A dancer whose figure is like a willow branch, my soul also quitteth me the sight of her movements. No foot can remain stationary at her dancing. She is though the fire of my heart were beneath her feet. Quoth Ibrahim, As I gazed upon her, she glanced to look up and caught sight of me, whereupon her face changed, and she said to her woman, Sing ye till I come back to you. Then taking up a knife, half a cubit long, she made towards me, crying, There is no majesty, and there is no might, save in Allah the glorious, the great. Now when I saw this, I well nigh lost my wits, but when as she drew near me and face met face, the knife dropped from her hand, and she exclaimed, "Glory to him who changeth men's hearts." Then said she to me, "O youth, be of good cheer, for thou art safe from what thou fearest." Whereupon I fell to weeping, and she to wiping away my tears, and her hand, and saying, "O youth, tell me who thou art, and what brought thee hither." I kissed the ground before her, and seized her skirt, and she said, "No harm shall come to thee, for by Allah no male hath ever filled mine eyes but thyself. Tell me, who art thou?" So I recited to her my story from first to last, whereat she marveled and said to me, "O my lord, I conjure thee by Allah, tell me if thou be Ibrahim bin al-Kahiz." I replied, "Yes." And she threw herself upon me, saying, "O my lord, 'twas thou madest me averse from men. For when I heard that there was in the land of Egypt a youth that was no more beautiful in all the face of the earth, I fell in love with thee by report, and my heart became enamored of thee for that which reached me of thy passing comeliness, so that I was in respect of thee, even as the poet saith, 'Mine ear forewent mine eye in loving him, for ear shall love before the eye at time.' So praised be Allah who hath shown thy face. But by the Almighty, had it been other than thou, I'd had crucified the keeper of the garden, and the porter of the khan, and the tailor, and him who had recourse to them." And presently she added, "But how shall I contrive for somewhat thou mayest eat, without the knowledge of my women?" Quoth I, "With me is somewhat we may eat and drink." And I opened the bag before her. So she took a fowl and began to morsel me, and I to morsel her, which when I saw it seemed to me that this was a dream. Then I brought out wine, and we drank what while the damsel sang on. Nor did they leave to do thus from morn to noon, when she rose and said, "Go now, and get thee a boat, and await me in such a place till I come to thee, for I have no patience left to brook severance." I replied, "O my lady, I have with me a ship of my own, whose crew are at my hire, and they await me." Rejoined she, "This is as it should be," and returning to her women. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 958th night, she resumed, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the Lady Jamilah returned to her women, she said to them, 'Come, let us go back to our palace.' They replied, 'Why should we return now, seeing that we used to abide here 3 days?' Quoth she, 'I feel an exceeding oppression in myself, as though I were sick, and I fear lest this increase upon me.' So they answered, 'We hear and obey,' and donning their walking dresses, went down to the river bank and embarked in a boat. Whereupon, behold, the keeper of the garden came up to Ibrahim and said to him, knowing not what had happened, 'O Ibrahim, thou hast had the luck to enjoy the sight of her, and I fear lest she has seen thee, for 'tis her wont to tarry here for 3 days.' Replied Ibrahim, 'She saw me not, nor I her, for she came not forth the pavilion.' Rejoined the keeper, 'True, O my son, for had she seen thee, we would both be dead men. But abide with me till she come again next week, and thou shalt see her, and take thy fill of looking at her.' Replied the prince, 'O my lord, I have with me money, and fear for it. I also left men behind, and I dread lest they take advantage of my absence.' He retorted, 'O my son, 'tis grievous to me to part with thee.' And he embraced and farewelled him, and Ibrahim returned to the khan where he lodged, and foregathering with the doorkeeper, took of him all his property, and the porter, and said, 'Good news, inshallah.' But Ibrahim said, 'I have found no way to my want, and now I am minded to return to my people.' Whereupon the porter wept. Then taking up his baggage, he carried them to the ship, and bade him adieu. Ibrahim repaired to the place where Jamilah had appointed him, and awaited her there till it grew dark, when, behold, she came up disguised as a bully boy, with rounded beard and waist bound with a girdle. In one hand she held a bow and arrows, and in the other a bared blade, and she asked him, 'Art thou Ibrahim, son of Al-Hassan, lord of Egypt?' 'He I am,' answered the prince. And she said, 'What ne'er-do-well art thou, who comest to debauch the daughters of kings? Come, speak with the sultan.' Therewith quoth Ibrahim, I fell down in a swoon, and the sailors died in their skins for fear. But when she saw what betided me, she pulled off her beard, and throwing down her sword, ungirdled her waist, whereupon I knew for her to be the Lady Jamilah, and said to her, By Allah, thou hast rent my heart in sunder! Adding to the boatman, Hasten the vessel's speed. So they took out the sail, and putting off, fared on with all diligence. Nor was it many days ere we had made Baghdad, where suddenly we saw a ship lying by the river bank. When her sailors saw us, they cried out to the crew, saying, Ho, such an one and such an one, we give you joy of your safety. Then they drave their ship against our craft. And I looked, and in the other boat beheld Abu Al-Hassan and Sandalene, who, when he saw us, exclaimed, This is what I sought. Go ye in God's keeping. As for me, I have a need to be satisfied. Then he turned to me and said, Praise be Allah for safety. Hast thou accomplished thine errand? And I replied, Yes. Now Abu Al-Hassan had a flambeau before him, so he brought it near our boat. And when Jamilah saw him, she was troubled, and her color changed. But when he saw her, he said, Fare ye in Allah's safety. I am bound to Basra on business for the Sultan, but the gift is for him who is present. Then he brought out a box of sweetmeats, wherein was bhang, and threw it into our boat. Whereupon quoth I to Jamilah, O cooleth of mine eyes, eat of this. But she wept and said, O Ibrahim, what is thou who that is? And I said, Yes, 'tis such an one. Replied she, He is my first cousin, son of my father's brother, who sought me aforetime in marriage of my sire, but I would not accept of him. And now he is gone to Basra, and most like he will tell my father of us. I rejoined, O my lady, he will not reach Basra till we are at Mosul. But we knew not what lurked for us in the secret purpose. Then continued Ibrahim, I ate of the sweetmeat, but hardly had it reached my stomach when I smote the ground with my head, and lay there till dawn, when I sneezed, and the bhang issued from my nostrils. With this I opened my eyes, and found myself naked, and cast out among ruins. So I buffeted my face, and said to myself, Doubtless, this is a trick of Al-Sandalani hath played on me. But I knew not whither I should wend, for I had upon me naught save my bagged trousers. However, I rose and walked on a little, till I suddenly espied the chief of police coming towards me with a posse of men with swords and targes, whereat I took a fright, and seeing a ruined hammock, hid myself there. Presently my foot stumbled upon something, so I put my hand to it, and it became befouled with blood. I wiped my hand upon my bagged trousers, unknowing what had befouled it, and put it out a second time, when it fell upon a corpse whose head came up in my hand. I threw it down, saying, There is no majesty, and there is no might, save in Allah the glorious, the great. And I took refuge in one of the corner cabinets of the hammock. Presently the wali stopped at the bath door, and said, Enter this place and search it. So 10 of them entered with cressets, and I of my fear retired behind a wall, looking upon the corpse, saw it to be that of a young lady, with a face like the full moon, and her head lay on one side, and her body clad in costly raiment of the other. When I saw this, my heart fluttered with affright. Then the chief of police entered and said, Search the corners of the bath. So they entered the place wherein I was, and one of them, seeing me, came up, hending in hand a knife half a cubit long. When he drew near me, he cried, Glory be to God, the creator of this fair face. O youth, whence art thou? Then he took me by the hand and said, O youth, why slewest this the woman? Said I, By Allah, I slew her not, nor wot I who slew her, and I entered not this place but in fear of you. And I told him my case, adding, Allah upon thee, do me no wrong, for I am no concern for myself. Then he took me, and he carried me to the wali, who, seeing the marks of blood on my hand, said, We needeth no proof. Strike off his head. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 959th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Ibrahim continued. Then they carried me before the wali, and he, seeing the bloodstains on my hand, cried, This needeth no proof. Strike off his head. Now, hearing these words, I wept with sore weeping, the tears streaming from my eyes, and recited these 2 couplets. We trod the steps that for us were writ, and whose steps are written by needs must tread, and whose death is decreed in one land to be, he ne'er shall perish in other stead. Then I sobbed a single sob, and fell a swoon. And the headsman's heart was moved to ruth for me, and he exclaimed, By Allah, this is no murderer's face. And the chief said, Smite his neck. So they seated me on the rug of blood, and bound my eyes, after which the sworder drew his sword, and asked leave of the wali, was about to strike off my head, whilst I cried out, Alas, my strangerhood! When lo and behold, I heard a noise of a horse come up, and a voice called aloud, Leave him! Stay thy hand, O sworder! Now there was for this a wondrous reason and a marvellous cause, and 'twas thus. Al-Khasib, Wazir of Egypt, had sent his head chamberlain to the Caliph Harun al-Rashid with presents, and a letter saying, My son hath been missing this year past, and I hear that he is in Baghdad. Wherefore I crave of the bounty of the vice-regent of Allah, that he may make search for tidings of him, and do his endeavour to find him, and send him back to me with the chamberlain. When the Caliph read the missive, he commanded the chief of police to search out the truth of the matter, and he ceased not to inquire after Ibrahim, till it was told him that he was at Basra. Whereupon he informed the Caliph, who wrote a letter to the viceroy, and, giving to the chamberlain of Egypt, bade him repair to Basra, and take with him a company of the wazir's followers. So of his eagerness to find the son of his lord, the chamberlain set out forthright, and happened by the way upon Ibrahim, as he stood on the rug of blood. When the wali saw the chamberlain, he recognized him, and alighted to him, and as he asked, What young man is that, and what is his case? The chief told him how the matter was, and of the chamberlain, and indeed he knew not that this was the son of the Sultan. Verily, this young man hath not the face of one who murders. And he bade loose his bonds. So they loosed him, and the chamberlain said, Bring him to me. And they brought him. But the officer knew him not, his beauty being all gone for the horrors he had endured. Then the chamberlain said to him, O youth, tell me thy case, and how cometh this slain woman with thee? Ibrahim looked at him, and knowing him, said to him, Woe to thee! Dost thou not know me? Am I not Ibrahim, son of thy lord? Haply thou art come in quest of me. With this the chamberlain considered him straitly, and knowing him right well, threw himself at his feet, with which the wali saw his colour changed. And the chamberlain cried to him, Fie upon thee, O tyrant! Was it thine intent to slay the son of my master Al-Khasib, Wazir of Egypt? The chief of police kissed his skirt, saying, O my lord, how should I know him? We found him in this plight, and saw the girl lying slain by his side. Rejoined the chamberlain, Out on thee! Thou art not fit for the office. This is a lad of 15, and he hath not slain a sparrow, so how can he be a murderer? Why dost thou not have patience with him, and question him of his case? Then the chamberlain and the wali cried to the men, Make search for the young lady's murderer. So they returned to the bath, and finding him, brought him to the chief of police, who carried him to the caliph, and acquainted him with all that had occurred. Al-Rashid bade slay the slayer, and sending for Ibrahim, smiled in his face, and said to him, Tell me thy tale, and that which hath betided thee. So he recounted to him his story from first to last. It was grievous to the caliph, who called Masrur his sworder, and said to him, Go straightway, and fall upon the house of Abu Al-Qasim al-Sandalani, and bring me him and the young lady. The eunuch went forth at once, and breaking into the house, found Jamilah, bound with her own hair, and nigh upon death. So he loosed her, and taking the painter, carried them both to the caliph, who marvelled at Jamilah's beauty. Then he turned to Al-Sandali, and said, Take him and cut off his hands, wherewith he beat this young lady. Then crucify him, and deliver his monies and possessions to Ibrahim. They did his bidding, and as they were thus, behold, in came Abu Al-Lays, governor of Basra, the lady Jamilah's father, seeking aid of the caliph against Ibrahim bin Al-Khasib, Wazir of Egypt, and complained to him that the youth had taken his daughter. Quoth Al-Rashid, He hath been the means of delivering her from torture and slaughter. Then he sent for Ibrahim, and when he came, he said to Abu Al-Lays, Wilt thou not accept of this young man, son of the Sultan of Egypt, as husband to thy daughter? Replied Abu Al-Lays, I hear and I obey, Allah and thee, O commander of the faithful. Whereupon the Caliph summoned the Qazi and the witnesses and married the young lady to Ibrahim. Furthermore, he gave him all Sundali's wealth and equipped him for his return to his own country, where he abode with Jamilah in the utmost of bliss and the most perfect of happiness, till there came to him the destroyer of delights and the sunderer of societies. And glory be to the living who dieth not. They also relate, O auspicious king, a tale anent of Abu Al-Hassan of Khorassan. The Caliph Al-Mu'tazid Billah was a high-spirited prince and a noble-minded lord. He had in Baghdad 600 wazirs, and of the affairs of the folk naught was hidden from him. He went forth one day, he and Ibn Hamdun, to divert himself with observing his lieges and hearing the latest news of the people. And being overtaken with the heat of noonday, they turned aside from the main thoroughfare into a little by-street at the upper end, whereupon they saw a handsome and high-builded mansion, discoursing of its owner with the tongue of praise. They sat down at the gate to take rest, and presently out came 2 eunuchs, as they were moons on the 14th night. Quote one of them to the fellow, "Would heaven some guest would seek admission this day? My master will not eat but with guests, and we are come to this hour, and I have not yet seen a soul." The Caliph marveled at their speech, and said, "This is a proof of the housemaster's liberality. There is no help but we go in to him and note his generosity, and this shall be a means of favor betiding him from us." So as he said to the eunuch, "Ask leave of the Lord for the admission of a company of strangers." For in those days it was the Caliph's wont, whenas he was minded to observe his subjects, to disguise himself in merchant's garb. The eunuch went in and told his master, who rejoiced, and rising came out to them in person. He was fair of favour and fine of form, and he appeared clad in a tunic of Nicephor silk and a gold-laced mantle, and he dripped with scented waters, and wore on his hand a signet ring of rubies. When he saw them, he said to them, "Welcome and welcome to the lords, who favour us with the utmost of favour by their coming." So they entered the house, and found it such as would make a man forget family and fatherland, for it was like a piece of paradise. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of this tale, till it be morrow.